chickens get started. So yeah, I'm Sue Wyman. I go by Susan or Sue. Either one is fine. And I have Gunnison Gardens, and I've had large quantities of chickens for about 6 years now. So I'm not a total expert, but I've learned a lot in the 6 years, and I'm happy to share that with everyone. When I was a kid, my family had chickens, and I didn't pay that much attention because I was a kid. And I did the chores that I had to do and wasn't really responsible for their health and maintenance. But since I've had my wonderful flocks of ladies and gentlemen, I've learned a lot. So, so I put together a presentation about both laying hens and meat birds. And I also will talk a little bit at the end about rabbits in terms of food security and ways of feeding ourselves. So I know that there are some folks who have backyard chickens and their hens are just the love of their life. And I'll only have a couple of gory slides. But I'm an omnivore, and I do eat chickens, and I love chickens, and that might seem like a contrast, but I guess, what do we call this a trigger warning? Anyway, enough of that. So, so basically, trying to get my slides to advance. There we go. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of chickens. We have hens that lay eggs, laying hens. You could raise chickens for meat or, broilers or roasters, depending on the size. You can get a dual purpose chicken, which is kind of like eggs or meat, and you can get specialty breeds as well. So for laying hens, ideally you get, if you just want a hen that's going to lay eggs, you get a hen that has a small body and a good layer, and your catalogs will tell you a little bit about the types of hens that you're going to buy. But these laying hens will have a really good feed conversion ratio because she'll have a small body and she'll lay almost an egg a day. And so in that case, if you're looking for a real production layer or just a good long-term layer, you would look for a leghorn or an amberlink, whiting browns and whiting blues, which you can get out of the catalogs with many of the hatcheries. Sex links, red sex links are black, and well summers, those are all common, really good laying hens. And if you're looking for raising chickens for meat, you're looking for, in contrast to the layer hen's small body, you're looking for a really large bodied bird, one that'll grow fast, and that has a really good feed conversion ratio in terms of pounds of chicken, not pounds of egg. And so in this case, that's how we calculate our feed conversion ratio. So Red Ranger, Freedom Ranger, Cornish Rock will do okay here. Cornish Rocks do not, or Cornish Cross do not do well at our altitude. I tend to raise, these days I've sort of honed in Whiting Farms, Colorado Golds, and I like to raise Turkins. They do really well here. So that's a couple of varieties to look for. And be careful when you're going to the chicken catalogs. This is an example of the Murray McMurray catalog. They're an excellent hatchery if you're looking for chicks by male, but they will tell you specifically, if you're looking at some of their meat birds, these are not recommended for an altitude above 5,000 feet. I think my slides are cutting off now and I don't understand why, but the edge of the slide is altitude of 5,000 feet. So, and although I've had really good success with Turkins, raising them as meat birds, Francie Yeager out near Powderhorn, I think she's up at about 8,000, excuse me, my farm is at 7,600 feet. I'm right in Gunnison. But above 8,000 where Francie is, she had a really tough time with the Turkins, apparently. So as I say, your mileage may vary. You may want to experiment a little bit. One of the coolest experiments I did was the first year that I got chickens. I actually did order from Murray McMurray Hatchery that year, and I got 100 chickens. They were straight run, which meant a mix of male and female, and they were called mixed heavies. So they were heavy birds that could be, you could either use it for meat or eggs. And it was a menagerie. There were there were Turkins, there were these black things, there were something I figured out were probably a Pioneer or a Dixie Cross, just an amazing mix of chickens. And it was a good learning experience. Maybe not the most profitable way to get into eggs and meat, but you got to get your feet wet, figure out what you're doing. So you could try that. So if you do go for a dual purpose bird, you will be looking for a bird that's a larger bodied bird that could also lay eggs. And if you're going to do that, they'll be great for a homestead or a small flock, but you certainly wouldn't want to do that if you were looking at raising birds for production or, you know, trying to make a profit on a small farm, because the feed conversion ratio is generally worse. The meat birds are going to take longer to grow out, and the laying hens are going to eat more feed for every egg they lay. So your feed conversion ratio is worse. But they can be a lot of fun, and there are some really beautiful varieties. And that could include things like buff Orpingtons. A lot of people like Orpingtons for egg laying, but they are heavier bodied. Australorps, Sussex, the Pioneers. These are popular breeds. So I'm not saying you shouldn't go for a dual purpose. And then the Rhode Island Reds, I always sort of debate as to whether they should fit in the dual purpose or the straight layers. They are good layers, but some of those girls are pretty heavy. I like Rhode Island Reds. So those I kind of put in with my laying hens. And then you can get some really interesting specialty birds. And every now and then my hatchery will provide me with some bizarre specialty birds. I've gotten Faveroles, which have like extra toes and feathers on their feet. And I've gotten silver speckled Hamburgs and just some really fun birds. But a lot of folks don't like the really funky ones because they're kind of harder to keep clean. They might have too many feathers in strange places and things like that. But I've had some really interesting birds in the last couple of years. Crevecoeur, which are a French heritage meat bird with a big top notch. And so, you know, it's about having fun too. It's not just about saying, I want to raise these eggs and, you know, make money at this. It's really about living with the earth. And just like we enjoy the beauty of flowers, you can totally enjoy the beauty and the personalities of the different kinds of chickens. And I should say, folks, I don't have the chat up because of my screen sharing. Actually, I think if I looked, I'm sorry, I got 3 monitors. If I looked over there, I'd probably be able to see the chat. But,
I'm watching it too.
Anyway. Perfect. So no chickens so far. All right. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. The next thing I want to talk about is, where would you get your chicks if you wanted to raise backyard chickens? Well, clearly you could go up to Tractor Supply. They have chick days going on right now, I think. Murdoch's down in Montrose has chick days. And in general, although the employees don't always know much about the chickens arrive, they come to Gunnison in the mail through the post office. They bring them to the Tractor Supply store right away. And, you know, they're not that old when you get them. You can see if they're alive and walking around, and you can pick a healthy chick out of the little galvanized watering trough that they have them in. It's a reasonable way to get chicks. But you'll have more selection if you go through mail order and go through some of the standard hatcheries that are designed for like backyard flocks. A lot of them will have, especially when it's cold, they'll have a 25 chick minimum, because if they take a day-old chick and they put it in a box and put it in the mail, if there's less than about 25, they can get too cold in transit. If there's more than 25, they'll all huddle together and surprisingly can last in the mail for several days. Of course, the first year that I got chickens and I had 100 and some in a box, you do open it up and see a few dead chicks. And that can be disturbing, especially if you're doing this with your children. But that's part of life. So just be prepared for that. And I should say along those lines, not just related to chicks, but the average life of a chicken, average, is about 6 years. And the maximum is somewhere around 12 years. But in between that, if you have chickens, they will die. And so you kind of get used to it. You never like it. But it's part of life as well, that kind of life and death. And I think that's just part of understanding nature. And you just prepare yourself and prepare your kids for that as much as it hurts. I've still got some chickens that I've named, and I wish I could bring them back to life. I have some that I miss even now. And in a given summer at my peak, I might have 700 chickens on my farm, but I do care deeply about each one of them. Even the ones that I'm raising for meat, I want them to have a humane life. And I don't want him to die. I don't want them to die tragic deaths before their time. So Joel Salatin said this about his animals on his farm. They have a really good life and one bad day. And if we can keep it to that, to where their whole life is kind of natural and fulfilling and not cruel and, you know, very humane and all of that, the day that they do die will, of course, be unpleasant if they consider it that way, but it's the best we can do for them. Anyway, I diverge. All right, back to chick sources. I get my chicks from Whiting Farms. They're down in Delta. Tom Whiting is this incredible chicken geneticist. But if you surf him up online, you'll hear all about roosters that are raised for hackles for fly tying. So he is world renowned for fly tying hackles, and he'll raise chickens with the hackles that are like 58 inches long, and that's the feathers that they can pull off, extract to make flies out of. And some of the hackles can sell for $3,000 to $10,000 just for fly tying. But that's what he's known for, and all of the other breeds that he's developed, you don't see much about him online. So he's a wholesaler. You couldn't go to his farm directly, but his birds are available through Murray McMurray Hatchery online. And I think that some of his birds are actually also available like at Murdoch's, or I forgot to put this on the slide, the Producers Co-op in Montrose carries chicks as well. So there are places that you can get his chicks. And then every now and then I'll do a group order and have people hop in and I'll get chicks for people, but it becomes a little bit difficult because it's a lot of keeping track, and Whiting doesn't always give me exactly what I need. They take good care of me, but if I came down and said, I want 3 Hamburgs and 16 purple or blue Wyandottes or something like that, I might not get everything that I wanted. So it makes it a little difficult. You got to go with the flow.
Sue, we have one question. What are the regulations for having backyard chickens in Gunnison?
Yes. It's primarily down to a noise ordinance. So if your neighbors complain, you can't have roosters. But when I went through the regs, which was about 6 or 7 years ago, there weren't any rules that you couldn't have roosters. If anyone knows differently, let me know. I know that like CB South, they have strict limits on the numbers of chickens, but Gunnison, it's based on noise and it's based on hygiene. So if you're not being clean with your chickens, and if you have roosters making noise, then they can enforce that way, which I think is just amazing because they're allowing us to grow food and all the neighbors around my farm, because my farm is in the middle of the city of Gunnison, they can hear my roosters, but the houses are far enough away that it's not, I guess, offensive to anybody. Not so far. All right. Oh yeah, I was going to say, I don't know what the forecast is for getting chicks this year, but in 2020, when the COVID lockdowns occurred, everyone started prepping and they were home and they were doing backyard gardening and chickens. And for a while, all of the hatcheries were sold out. And I saw a little post that came in on one of my news feeds that said, chicks are the new toilet paper. Because in February or March, we ran out of toilet paper, and in April, we ran out of baby chicks. So I would imagine that most of the hatcheries have geared up for that. The ice storms that hit Texas and the Midwest last month wiped out a lot of chicks in the mail, and the post office quit receiving chicks for like 7 to 10 days. And I'm sure that that has set food production in the US back a ways. So I'm a member of the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, which is great. It's about farms of all sizes that raise birds on pasture. And I heard a lot about the trials and tribulations of trying to get chicks shipped last month. It was pretty traumatic. Okay, so moving on, once you have your chicks, and you've got to figure out what to feed them. So there are different formulations. Just like if you had a puppy, you get puppy food, and then you get adult dog food, and then maybe you get senior dog food. It's a little bit similar for chicks. When you get started, you want to buy chick starter for your little guys and gals. The grains are going to be smaller. It's going to be, whether you're using crumbles or just ground grain, which is what I use, it'll be smaller for the chicks. The protein content will be higher. It'll be 20 to 22% protein, and the calcium will be a bit lower, just 1.5% calcium. You need to also give your little chicks chick grit. So grit are little rocks that chickens need to eat because they don't have teeth. They just have little beaks. And to chew their food, they have a gizzard, which is a little muscular organ. They have an esophagus and a crop where the food is held, and then a gizzard where the food is ground. And that gizzard is going to be filled with little rocks if you give them rocks to eat. If you don't give them any rocks to eat, they cannot grind up their food and they won't grow as well. They'll get, they can get stomach infections, and they'll eat more food and pass it through. So you definitely want to make sure that they have grit, and the chicks need teeny tiny grit. And that's that feed mix you'll give them from about age 0 or day 1 up to 6 weeks old. They get chick starter. Then after that, you can move them to either, if they're meat birds, you'll give them a broiler feed. And if they're layers, you'll either give them something intermediate. I actually keep my layers on chick starter for longer, because I don't want to bump them up to the 3% calcium. You don't want to give them too much calcium until they're ready to lay. So I keep them at 1.5% calcium till they're almost starting to lay at like 16 weeks old. And when they do need layer feed, then you can give them, it can be in a form of mash or pellets or crumbles, only 16% protein during the winter. During the summer, they eat less feed, and you can bump up the protein ratio, because it's just like us. We eat different amounts of protein and carbohydrates winter to summer, depending on how much we're burning. If we're really active, we might need more carbohydrate. And if we're really cold, we might need more carbohydrate. But then there's that sweet spot where, you know, more protein, less carbs to balance that out. So you really just think about what your chickens are going through and adjust their feed ratio that way. Chickens of all ages need grit, but by the time they're laying hens or broilers, they're eating bigger grit. So you just get a coarser size of grit. And the layers, of course, need oyster shell to make all of those eggs. So you can go up to Tractor Supply or your whatever feed supplier you use and get bags of oyster shell and just free feed that. Their food will have calcium in it, but you should also free feed oyster shell because they'll naturally supplement. They'll know what they need. And in the winter, if it's really, really cold, I feed a lot more scratch, and that's the extra carbohydrates for them without any extra protein. If you give your hens too much protein, they'll lay big, big, big eggs, and that's really not as healthy for them. And your meat birds or your broilers, you need a 20% protein mix and the grit. Any questions so far?
I have a question. How much, we have two. How much food do you know to feed them? Like, 3 cups of chicken or, that kind of thing. Like,
yeah, sure. A lot of the production farms will measure out in ounces per day per chicken. The problem that I have with that is in my flocks where they're all running around, interacting with each other, I'll have some shy little hens that will only eat at the feeders when no one else is looking. Well, the other thing is you should have enough feeder space that every bird has a spot at the feeder. You should not have a condition where you have feeders with little slots for 10 hens, but you've got 40 hens. They won't get what they need. But I'll still have some shy hens. So I actually free feed. In the industry, they say that you shouldn't necessarily free feed. You should feed for a while and let the feeders run empty. I'll do a little bit of that. I don't want to have my feeders just super full for my laying hens. I like to let them clean it out before I add more. So that didn't answer your question, other than the free feed. And then my broilers, man, I let them eat as much as they want. They need to get fat. So I free feed my broilers.
Okay, a couple more questions. How do you feel about giving chickens kitchen scraps? And then how much scraps would you give them?
I didn't hear the whole question, but it was, what do I think about feeding?
Like your kitchen
scraps,
and then like how much? Is there like too much you can do for kitchen?
Yeah, I was going to look and see if I have a slide on kitchen scraps. No, I don't. I should. All right. So I think that chickens like kitchen scraps. And so I think it would be terrible to deny them something they really like to eat. I also think that a varied diet is good for all of us. And so I love giving them carrot peels and spinach and weeds from the garden and all of that. I would be a little bit careful with things like potatoes. They don't like potatoes. And then the leaves of nightshades, like the leaves of tomatoes, are not good for them. They'll eat them, but I think it's not good. It's not that good for them. I don't know if it's inflammation or some other issue. So be a little bit careful, but yes, I think the great thing about chickens is they're real foragers, most of them. And so, and it can stretch your food budget because you're going to spend a lot of money on feed. And it's like, you wouldn't want to just eat, I don't know, kashi cereal every day. You would want a varied diet. So yeah, I say yes to chicken scraps. I even get some restaurant scraps. So I get some scraps from 2 restaurants in town, and they just put them out for me, and then I'll give them free eggs. In fact, I've got eggs here right now that I'm supposed to deliver to a couple of restaurants today. And I think for me, that's part of my regenerative agriculture. I'm trying to keep some of their kitchen waste out of the landfill. And I have so many chickens that no one chicken is going to get too much. So I don't want any chicken to have more than, say, 10% of its diet coming from treats and kitchen waste, not more than 10%, because I got to get that protein ratio right. But every now and then I've got food from both restaurants, and I walk out to the farm and I say, okay, ladies, what would you like? Italian or Chinese? Italian or Chinese? And then they decide if they want Italian or Chinese, because I've got to distribute it between all my flocks. I separate my hens by age cohort. And so at any given time, I might have 4 flocks of hens and that would represent 4 years worth or 3.5 years worth.
Okay, we have one more about the feed. Is the scratch feed lower in protein than layer feed, like the regular layer feed?
Yeah. So scratch, I consider that a treat and not feed. So scratch, I think this is a picture of scratch at the very top. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse or not. So that scratch is just grains, uncracked grains. Sometimes they'll crack the corn in it, but usually not. It can have big chunks of corn in it, big chunks of, like, it'll have millet in it, it'll have wheat in it. Typically there's no soy in it. So it's kind of, grains are not 100% carbohydrate. They have a small percentage of protein, but there's very little soy in it. So they're not getting much protein at all. It's pretty much carbohydrate. So it's like, oh, I know what I call it, crack. they go ape over scratch. And they run around and they want to eat it all really fast. And it's kind of like candy or crack. And so don't give them too much scratch.
Are mealworms good to feed chickens?
Oh, they love them. Yeah. And they're actually really high in fat and high in protein. So if you can afford it, I almost never give my chickens mealworms because like a bag can cost like $20 for a bag of mealworms. And I was raising them for a while. And you can raise your own mealworms and give them live mealworms, and it's really healthy for them. So that's like the little picture at the bottom. It just takes some extra time. And I found that I had exceeded my bandwidth, as they say, and I couldn't continue to raise my own mealworms. But I think there are still a few people in the Valley who are doing it. Yeah, they love it. They absolutely love it. And it's good for them when they're molting. So I don't have a slide about molting, but that's when the chickens go through a natural shedding and rejuvenation of their feathers. They'll typically do that in the fall as they're getting ready for winter. They all get new feathers. And when they're molting, they need extra protein, and the fat helps as well because they're trying to build up all of that tissue. So lots of mealworms then, yeah, if you can afford it. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. The one thing I really wanted to make sure everyone knew about chicken feed is the amino acid methionine. So methionine, we need it in our diet. It's called an essential amino acid. And by that, it means any amino acid that we cannot produce on our own. We have to get it from dietary sources. And we humans need amino acid for normal cell function. It has sulfur in it. It's one of the only 2 amino acids that has sulfur in it. And so it's used to make glutathione, SAM, which it's a big long word and you wouldn't really care anyway, but you can look that up. Cysteine and taurine, which are additional proteins, amino acids as well. And so if you could read this little chart, I don't know if you can see it, but for humans, the number one source of methionine is egg white, and then sesame seeds, Brazil nuts, cheese, hemp, and you go down and chicken. That's a meat chicken. Broilers, fryers, or roasted. That's like the 5th, 6th, 7th thing on the list is chicken, and then fish, tuna, beef, and then whole eggs. So my point is we need to get methionine, and chickens are the best source, but chickens have to get it too, because they do not naturally make methionine. It has to come from their food sources. So almost all of your feed suppliers will include adequate amounts of methionine in their feed. However, I have a really good feed supplier, West Slope Egg Center, that I like a lot. But last year, I'm pretty convinced that I got a shipment of feed that didn't have the methionine added. And I knew that because I had these baby chicks, and when they were about as big as these guys, or maybe a little bit bigger, they were probably 7 to 10 days old. And I had 200 chicks in my brooder, and they were running around doing little chick things, all fine one day. The next morning I went in to check on them, and about 40 out of the 200 had little bloody tails where they had been pecking at each other. Well, that's called just feather pecking. And they do that because there's methionine in their feathers. And so they want to eat feathers because they're deficient. So it's amazing. The amazing thing about it is that the birds know what they need. They innately know what they need. So they start eating feathers. Now, the bad thing is the feathers are attached to somebody else's butt. And so it can be very harmful. And then I had all these little bleeding chicks, but I've been at it long enough. I'm so grateful for the fact that I understood immediately, ooh, looks like a nutrient deficiency. They ran up to Tractor Supply where they carry this little product called Farmer's Helper. And it's an ultra kibble for chicks. And I've checked out the ingredients, and it has, I don't know, like 0.36% methionine. I gave it to my chicks. I sprinkled it in all of their little feeders. And by the afternoon, they had quit eating each other's feathers. So that's probably the most important critical nutrient that you need to know about in terms of your chicks. and your other birds as well. Needs to be in their feed the whole time. So if you're mixing your own feed or you're feeding too much, you couldn't just feed them worms and wheat. They need specific nutrients too. So, okay. So where should you get your feed? Clearly, you can go to Tractor Supply. Fortunately, the Gunnison feed store near Napa is going out of business, so that is no longer a source for us. I get my feed from West Slope Ag Center in bulk barrels. Each barrel of feed weighs 330 pounds. And there are some months in the summer when I'll go through 12 or more barrels of feed. So the summer, my feed bill could be $1,200 or $1,400 a month. But that's because I just love chickens. I'm crazy about chickens, and the more the merrier. West Slope Ag Center will deliver to the fairgrounds on the first Friday of each month. So if you have enough chickens to justify it, you can get on their list and be part of that delivery. You can get food at the Producers Co-op in Montrose. The Delta Elevator also sells bulk feed. There's quite a few sources. Any questions before I move on?
I had just one question, which you might cover later, but how do you get your chickens to stop eating their own eggs if that ends up happening? And is that some sort of like deficiency that they are having?
No, they do that because eggs taste good. Oh my gosh. When you get an egg eater, they are almost impossible to rehabilitate. I don't have a slide about it, so we can talk about it right now. So if you have an egg eater and you know which one she is, you should probably call her. But I used to cull mine when they were out on pasture in the summer, and that is very difficult to do. And so the other thing that you could do is you could try to retrain them. They will kind of go in cycles. What I recommend is you can do a few things. You could put in a fake egg, well, I've got some up on my shelf, but I won't jump up and grab them. You can get like ceramic or wooden fake eggs. The fake eggs are so convincing, the chickens think that they're real. And if they go to peck on it, they get nothing. And so then maybe they figure out, oh, I guess I won't peck at eggs. It's not very rewarding. That's one way you can do it. Try to convince them to not do that. The other thing I recommend is collecting eggs more frequently and making sure that if you're using a nest box, they have clean hay in the nest box. If there's little eggshells in there, you toss that out and put in clean hay so that they're not attracted to the smell and the residue of old eggs. The other thing, we've got some of these and they work really well, is to use rollout nest boxes. Then you've got to train your girls to the rollout nest box. They work well. So, okay. Any other questions before I go on? Okay.
Wait, I actually do have a question. Sorry, Sue. So when they're out on pasture, how do you collect their eggs? Do you just like find them randomly, like Easter egg hunting, or do they, like, how do you train them to go to?
No. Yeah, I'll show you in a bit what my chicken tractors look like. I'll go through the slide and then you'll see each chicken tractor has nest boxes in it. And you need to train them to the nest box. Every now and then we'll have chickens that lay on the ground. But we just destroy any nests that they're trying to nest on the ground, because it's very difficult to know that those, it's hard to keep them clean. It's hard to know that they're fresh and all of that. So I'll show you my setup in just a second. And the question is, well, if it's so hard to, get them to lay in the right place, why would you even put a hen out on pasture? Well, the reality is they're healthiest when they're out on pasture. Studies have been done and they show that the eggs, if the hens are out on pasture, the eggs have twice the amount of vitamin E and omega-3s. They have more beta carotene. That's why the yolks look more orange. That's why they taste better. Those eggs are a lot higher in vitamin D, which we know with COVID, we need to keep our vitamin D levels up. And eggs are a really healthy source of vitamin D. And then when they're out on the pasture, the chickens can eat grass and they can eat clover and they can eat bugs and worms. And when Brianna was talking, I remembered, oh yeah, and they really like to eat dandelions. So, they eat all of the things that they were basically evolved to eat. And so Oh, well, they need water. I want to talk about pasture. Here we go. Here we go. Summer housing. So what I do with my birds, this lower picture is an example of one of our chicken tractors. It has a ramp on the back. You'll see that on the right-hand side of this slide. And the chickens can walk up and down the ramp. So they walk up in there every night and go to sleep on the roost. And they walk down in the morning and run around on the pasture. They also walk up during the day to lay an egg in these little nest boxes that are sticking out. And we just raise the lid and collect the eggs from that nest box. And I've got them on each side because interestingly, they'll pick a side based on the time of day and where the shade is and whether it's too warm or too cold. And they just have their preferences. And then each of these tractors has a total of about 8 nest boxes. And of course, all the hens want to lay in 2 nest boxes. And it's always, they're so funny. So that's how we do it. And we do not let them lay on the ground. We just kind of destroy any place that they're thinking is a good place to put eggs on the ground. And then we move these chicken tractors regularly. So that keeps them from laying on the ground as well, because they know their nest boxes and they can count on it. And also the nest boxes are actually really secluded, and chickens like to lay eggs in a secluded, dark place. So that's in our operation, the nest boxes are the best places for them to lay in their own perception.
We have one question from Gail. She wants to know how you deal with predators while keeping your chickens out on pasture.
Ooh, you know what, Gail, we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, in this slide, see this little post sticking up? That's a post of electric netting. And so we'll talk about predators in a little bit. And then this one with the meat birds up on top. I don't know if my pointer is on the right screen. This one up on top, that is a bit of electric netting that you're seeing there. So, because we definitely have predators. We have foxes all over our farm. We have hawks and eagles. Once we had owls. Oh, sorry, I'll shut up. That's another slide, so I'll get there. Okay, in their summer housing, you could do stationary housing. All of ours is mobile. And again, we put our layers in these chicken tractors and we try to move them once a week if we can. Real pasture poultry folks try to move them every day, but with all of our electric netting, it's just too much work for us. We just can't quite pull that off. Then the top slide shows these little hoop coops, and that's what our broilers, our meat birds are in. And we'll set up a big bunch of electric netting and then we'll move the hoop coops inside. We'll get a few internal moves before we move the whole operation. And so our little, well, they turn into big roosters here. They have some roosts, but a lot of them just sleep on the ground. Whereas the hens have to go inside the chicken tractor and sleep inside on a roost every night. But no matter how they sleep, during the day, they also need shade. Our sun is so hot in Colorado, you have to, even in Colorado, even though the nights are cold, you have to provide shade for your chickens, and they have to have a place to get out of the wind and the rain and the snow. And that's why I like these chicken tractors on wheels, because they'll go underneath if it's too hot or too cold or too windy, and they'll hang out underneath. So, okay, so this is how we feed our meat birds out on pasture and what our waters look like. And these are called range feeders. Keeps the rain off, and you can put up to 50 pounds of feed in there. So what else? That's just, yeah, food and water. And oh, grit. See the pan of grit in the middle? That's rocks. I just go, I go over to one of the city rock piles and just get rocks. They eat the rocks. Okay. That's what I use for grit. Okay, then you have to decide how long to keep your hens out on, hens and meat birds out on summer pasture. But I got to tell you, this was September of last year, and we leave our chickens out on pasture until November. We typically move them indoors right before Thanksgiving. So they had to endure this little snowstorm, as did everybody. You know, what, a week later, all the snow melted off and they were back to green grass and bugs. So it was crazy last fall. When we move them indoors in the winter, we have a high tunnel, and which is just a plastic covered structure. The one that I put the chickens in is 24 feet wide and 95 feet long. And then we separate the age cohorts, and we have little winter houses that and again, it's kind of the same idea. They walk up the little ramp and they lay their eggs in the nest boxes, and they just hang out in there all winter long. And at that point, I have to bring them fresh greens and alfalfa and all the things they need for a varied diet. They get the same feed with a little bit more carbohydrate. Yeah. And then you have to make sure they have ventilation. If you try to put your chickens in a winter house that's sealed up too tightly, they'll do worse. They'll get lung infections. You're better to have a hole in the top and a hole in the bottom so a breeze can go through, because they really need good ventilation. And they're amazingly cold hardy. Their combs might freeze off in the winter, depending on what variety you have. And I'm sure that is slightly painful. But, well, actually, I'm not sure. I don't know. I try to get rose combs with smaller combs so they don't freeze off. All right. All your roosters are going to start with pointy combs and have little nubbins by the time they're 4 years old. Okay. In the winter, sometimes I raise fodder for my girls to eat. And you can get some barley grains and soak them overnight, and then rinse them in these, just poke holes in trays and rinse them every day, and then put them in the sun to green up and feed them. And the girls will go crazy. They just love them. But that is quite a bit of work to raise your own fodder. It can be a bit labor intensive. So you can do just as well to get a bale of pure alfalfa. You can get that from West Slope Ag Center. You can get it up at Tractor Supply. Not a grass alfalfa mix like what the local ranchers raise, but pure alfalfa. And that will give them, it's kind of like a dried salad, and they eat it, they like it, and they will eat that all winter long. So it's a bit easier. I think it's $14 a bale through West Slope Ag Center for a bale of alfalfa. And just go through it. Give them a few flakes every other day, something like that.
Rachel wants to know if you do anything for the frostbitten combs on the chickens.
No, I express my condolences. I overwinter a couple hundred of chickens, and what I've noticed is their combs will turn black, and then they'll be kind of white, and then the frozen part will fall off, and then they'll be more resistant to frost because the pointy parts that stick out won't get frozen. So, and my chickens have insulated houses inside the high tunnel, but it can be fairly cold at night. But I also found that sometimes by leaving the door off the insulated house, they do better. And there's not much that you can really do for a frozen comb. And it's interesting, their feet don't freeze. If you're making roosts for your chickens in the winter, don't make little round roosts. That's not how chickens roost. They need to sit on something that's at least as wide as a 2x4. And then they put their feet flat, and then they sit on them with all their feathers. They can keep their feet amazingly warm. And then sometimes they'll tuck their head under their wing, and it's usually just the comb sticking out the top that's exposed. And I don't know, Rachel, do I sound like I'm cruel? I don't do anything when their combs get frozen. Yeah.
So we don't either. Our chickens we had a heat lamp set up for them last year, and they would literally sleep away from them. So we just stopped doing it. Like, they're really cold hardy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they are amazingly cold hardy. Yep.
We do very little for our.
Okay, so. Yeah.
They have a structure, but they're essentially just outdoors all winter. And they stopped laying. I wouldn't say they thrive over winter, but they survive for sure. Started laying already.
Yeah. And ours lay throughout the year, but there's a definite seasonality to the laying. So I like to raise my chickens more naturally. A lot of people ask, should I add lights? Because their laying is tied to the day length. So as we approach winter solstice and the days are incredibly short, the hens will lay fewer and fewer eggs. And then coming out of solstice, by January and February, they just start cranking out the eggs. So in my case, for example, I've got, like I said, a couple hundred chickens that I'm overwintering. The depth of solstice and thereabouts, we were only getting 4.5 dozen eggs a day. And now we're getting about 12 dozen eggs a day. So that makes it kind of difficult to manage an egg share because you're barely meeting demand in the middle of winter. And then in the spring, about this time of year, you got more eggs than you know what to do with. So, so the question a lot of people have is, should I add artificial light? Because if you add light and the hens think the day length is longer, you can increase their egg production during those short winter days by up to 25%. And there are battery operated ones and there are plug in the wall ones, and Henlight, which I show a picture of here, is a really good brand for chicken lighting. But I personally don't use artificial lighting for my hens. I think they're dealing with Gunnison's cold winter. I'm asking enough of them to just stay alive in this climate. I care about them deeply, and I don't want to force them into producing when maybe nature is telling them that they should conserve energy. And I want them to go to bed. I want them to tuck their feet under themselves and go to sleep when it's cold and dark. So, so for that reason, I don't use artificial lights. I think as a result, I get fewer deaths, and overall my hens will have a longer lifespan. And yours will too. But it's a choice. Some people use them and they just swear by the fact that they're getting more eggs. Okay. Now, was it Gail who had the question about predators? We can talk about predators now. Unless there was another question before we move on.
Amy just wanted to know where you sell your eggs.
Oh, yeah. So I have a front porch egg CSA, $5.50 a dozen in the CSA, pay monthly at the first of the month, easy pickup location on Pine Street, close to everything in Gunnison. Email me or text me if you would like to be in my egg CSA. I also put out, and I'm not going to disclose the location directly here because this video will be posted to YouTube. But I'm happy to have people join my egg CSA, and you can come to my front porch and pop up with the cooler, and there'll be eggs with your name on them, and you choose Monday, Wednesday, or Friday to pick up eggs. I do that all winter long. In the summer, I just sell at the farmers markets. I did have a few people who picked up on my porch because of COVID last year. But I think it'll just be at the farmers market. That lets everybody go on vacation, and I just bring lots of eggs to the Gunnison Farmers Market and the Crested Butte CB South Farmers Market. So, yeah. Okay, so predators. We all need to know about predators because everything wants to eat your chicken. At our farm, we have foxes. We've had dogs from the neighborhood come in and kill our chickens, get through the electric netting. We have hawks and owls. We've had a weasel. The skunks and raccoons, in our case, just will get in there and try to eat eggs. We don't have much problem with that on our farm. But basically, our solution for all of it is electric netting. We found that works the best. Guys, I could have shown you a really gory picture. The biggest catastrophe we had at our farm in our 6th year of having chickens. In November of last year, a weasel or something got in. We don't really know what it was. It got in and killed 11 of our hens and left dead hens everywhere. It was just awful. It was very traumatic. But this slide, I just, this is like pull your punches. That's chicken feathers on the ground. That's when the fox got the chicken and all you see is what I call a feather splat. And you learn to look, you can see where the chicken met her end and which direction the wind was blowing and which way the fox went. You really learn to read the signs. And my philosophy is, it is not my job to kill foxes. It's not my job to kill skunks or owls or anything. It's probably illegal to kill most of them. It is my job to keep my chickens safe. I am not at war with any of the animals on my farm. And for being in the city of Gunnison, I have an amazing number of wild animals. But what I do is try to keep my chickens safe. So I use electric netting. I get mine from Premier One. I must say that last year, Premier One was back ordered on their electric netting. I think a lot of that supply chain has caught up with demand. It's the best electric netting I've found. It's not cheap. They do make a couple of different kinds, heavy duty and lighter duty and all of that. I always get the kind that have 2 pins to put in the ground because I move mine often enough. So the electric netting with little solar panels work because I don't have electricity on my farm. It's a system that works so well for us. Okay, if it works so well, why did something get in and kill 11 of my hens last fall? It's because we got complacent and we didn't check our electric netting. You do need to check it, test it, and make sure the weeds don't grow up around it. And if you keep it operational, it is foolproof. It'll keep out, bears don't like electricity either. It'll almost keep out bears. It'll keep out almost everything. Other people maybe use dogs. If your chickens are close to your house, the dogs can scare predators away. You can specifically get livestock guardian dogs that are trained to protect your chickens. And the other thing that you should generally do is close your coops every night. And you can do it manually or you can get automatic door closers. I can't tell you how many of my local chicken friends have said, I close them up, and then, we were gone and the neighbors didn't close it up, or nothing was happening and we got complacent and we went 4 days without closing it up. And that's when your hens are going to get attacked in the night. Okay, so I think that's it for predator control. Okay, you guys, trigger warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the meat birds and the meat bird processing. We process our birds on farm under the Colorado Small Farm Exemption. On farm for us means at our greenhouse location a few blocks away. And we get out the stainless steel tables and do all of that. I've trained a lot of people on how to process chickens. I think it's important for us to know where our food comes from. And then the financials behind it are what we find. Oh, hey, I got to tell you, this picture of a chicken is actually one of our chickens. And Mike Bussey of Garlic Mike's bought some chickens and cooked this chicken and sent me a picture of the chicken. So it's a delicious, healthy chicken prepared by one of the best chefs we have in town. So there we go. We can do this. Anyway, I was going to talk a little bit about the financials because I think what you'll find, you see all of the equipment and infrastructure that we have in place. It can be not inexpensive to get started in chickens. You can lowball it. You can feed them in cottage cheese containers as long as they have water and you're keeping them protected. You can do it kind of on the cheap, but it's the feed that's really going to add up. And for us at our farm, feed costs, we sell our meat birds and we sell our eggs, and feed costs on average during the year are about 50% of our entire revenue from our chickens. So they're not inexpensive to feed. And some of the capital costs, like if you do have to build your chicken houses or get electric netting or buy all of your feeders and waters, it can take a few years to recoup those capital costs. But I think we need to not just look at the financials. Let's get beyond just looking at dollars. Let's look at the value of food security, of having a resilient local food system, and look at the value of the health of the food. It tastes so much better. It's raised humanely, and it's just so much better for your family to eat this type of food, in my opinion. So just looking, and they're fun. There are so many reasons to raise chickens. This is me just sitting on a bucket loving on my chickens a few years back. And that's my husband, Scott, who usually wants nothing to do with the farm, but he likes to go out and pet chickens. So he's got some meat birds he's loving on in there. As I'm going to move on to wrap. Oh, go ahead.
We have one question from Carla. She wants to know if you ever have classes on butchering chickens and how to do it humanely and safely.
You know, I don't do it as a class, but I have invited people to just when we're processing. So I guess you could kind of call it a class. It's a hands-on class because on the day that we process chickens, we are focused and we are busy. And I kind of have the A team of a core of people locally that help with that. But I think it's so important for us all to learn that I'm willing to invite a couple of people at a time to step in, and we might put you on the intermediate plucking station. So, you know, I forgot to put in a slide about our processing equipment. We have a kill station with killing cones and a way to do it quickly so that it's as humane as possible. Like you cut the jugular and the chicken loses blood pressure immediately, and it doesn't feel anything more after that. And then they have to be scalded, and then they have to go into our automatic plucker. And then we have an intermediate plucking station, and then we have a fine plucking station, and then they go to the evisceration table, and then they go into a chill tank. And we have sanitary procedures all along the way and safety procedures all along the way. And so if you're really interested in learning how we do it, just send me an email, and we'll probably be processing 7 or 8 times this summer, because we can only do about, well, probably 6 times this summer. We can only do about 90 birds at a time. The most we've ever done in a day is 99. And so, you know, it takes us a few batches to do all of our birds. So send me an email and I'll invite you to come and get your hands dirty and just sort of see and understand the workflow. Okay, so I'm going to move on to rabbit. And I'm going to talk about raising rabbits for meat. And if that, and I hope that does not offend people. I hope that that does not offend people. Okay. So you might be asking, well, why would we want to raise rabbits? Well, I think we should feed the people. So rabbits are actually really good. I was raised in a family that we raised rabbits and ate rabbit at least once a week in my childhood. And you can eat them braised, baked, fried, stewed, fricasseed, barbecued, sweet and sour, smoked, roasted, glazed, covered in pineapple slices. You can can them or make them into pot pies. So rabbits are really good. My mom just made fried rabbits almost every Sunday. We had fried rabbit. It was really good. But the main point, if you've ever read, I know there's a vegetarian book that came out in the 60s or 70s, Diet for a Small Planet. The author of that book clearly indicated that rabbits are more sustainable because they grow out faster and they need less feed and less water than a lot of our standard protein sources. And for me, considering it in Gunnison, they'll need less outsourced feed than a chicken does. And I like raising broiler chickens and people like eating them, but I'm bringing in the feed. We feed all non-GMO feed to our chickens. It's sourced on the West Slope, but I'm still having it trucked in. And by raising rabbits, I could provide local meat with less outside inputs. So that's another compelling reason to raise rabbits for meat. Okay, and then online, rabbits have an excellent feed conversion ratio and really fast production, and they're a good source of protein. And I guess I said that already, less outsourced feed. And here's a comparison of rabbits to beef. Now, I must say, I get my beef from Parker Pastures, and it is the most divine beef in the world. And so I'm not sure I'd say this is completely an either or. I think we all need a varied diet. And if you're in a Parker Pastures beef share, don't give that up just to eat rabbits. But if you eat a lot of chicken, maybe consider whether rabbit is an appropriate alternative protein source for you. And the best breeds, if you're going to raise rabbits for meat, Californian, that's what my dad raised when I was young, and New Zealand's. My dad also raised a Rex. Whoops, I shouldn't have clicked on that. Then there's some other breeds like Flemish Giants and Palominos and Silver Foxes. But I think the Californian, the New Zealand, or the Rex and the Flemish are the ones that we're most familiar with in this area. And then what are the barriers to using rabbits for meat production? Well, one, they're too darn cute. People think, oh, you're going to eat a little bunny. Well, cows are cute. Chickens are wonderful. I mean, frankly, I'm an omnivore and I have to own my position on the food chain. So I think we might have to, if we're going to have rabbits as a sustainable food source, we'll need to deal with some public perception along those lines. The other unfortunate thing is when Colorado wrote the small farm processing rules, it's 7:30. Okay, this is my second to last slide. When they wrote the rules, they left out rabbits, so we cannot technically process on farm and sell directly to the public. But I think there are some ways around that. And then we would need to teach people they need to learn how to cook and serve rabbits. And so Chloe at Parker Pastures raised rabbits. We're considering having a rabbit share this year. So to get around the small farm processing rules, you would own the rabbit and we would raise your rabbit and we would either help you process your rabbit or we would process your rabbit for you for free, something like that. The 4-H programs have rabbits involved and a lot of homesteaders are raising rabbits. So it's not like we're not starting on that. I think we just really need to consider whether it would work and whether you're going to raise chickens or whether you're going to raise rabbits or whatever you're going to do, just raise vegetables and forage, have fun. Okay.
Awesome.
Other
Thanks.
questions?
What do you feed the rabbits?
So when I was a kid, we just fed Purina rabbit chow, right? So, but rabbits can eat primarily a grass diet. And they do need a lot of alfalfa. And Chloe Parker this year was experimenting with various vegetables. And I've got a book that I've been going through and tons of website links that I follow. But there's one on raising pastured rabbits. And they can have a somewhat varied diet, but they're actually a little more sensitive than chickens to variations in their diet. But I think it's the grass-fed component for them to be, on par with a ruminant, like a cow. That's why they can be a local food source that's local. Whereas chickens go out and chickens eat grass, but they eat grass, but they're on it. So, okay, so I lost Zoom. I don't know where I'm at.
That's okay. I think that's all of our questions. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks for everyone's commitment to local food. Thanks for showing up tonight.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for our keynote speaker on food sovereignty.
Okay.
All right, bye. Have a great night.